We are now live on YouTube with the July 17th meeting of the Node.js modules team. We're joined by a bunch of other individuals, and we've got a couple different things on the agenda. To start off, we've got Brian Clark from GitHub, who's visiting us as an observer for the day. Brian wanted to come and talk to us a bit about namespaces and specifiers and multiple registries and some of the things GitHub has been thinking about. So I'll hand it over to him. I'm going to set a 15-minute time box on this, and we can extend it if we need to. Brian?
Cool. Yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate the time. I tried to summarize the issue a little bit in the GitHub issue for this meeting. Essentially, for the GitHub package registry, we want to be good citizens and try and figure out a way to kind of coexist with NPM. But as I kind of detailed, there's a bit of problem about namespacing. And so we're trying to figure out what the best kind of resolution is where, I think for GitHub, we can feel effective for developer ergonomics and also kind of like going forward. And there's also, like we have a bit of kind of customer aspects as well. But really, mostly we're kind of concerned with like, how do we fit in with the overall ecosystems and what's the recommended route? So I detailed a couple systems, like we're looking at using URLs to more completely describe where packages come from, because the NPM package system uses what we call a global namespace. I'm not sure if that's the actual term for it, but when you're looking for React, you just have a single React package without a URL that kind of gives you a domain destination for that. So we're trying to figure out how we can integrate. So I'd love some feedback on the proposal. I saw a couple notes in there. I think I posted this earlier in the TSC meeting, and so some of the discussion is also happening there as well.
Anyone have anything to add? So some of the stuff that I can add, Brian, that we've been having discussions about specifically around like namespaces, there's kind of like two different bits here. One is namespaces for built-ins. So there's a proposal at TC39, recently changed its name. It was JavaScript Standard Library. Now it's built-in modules. They're looking at creating built-in embedded modules into like essentially the JavaScript VM. Those are being looked at as, I think UUID is an example of one that's being explored right now. Like, what's a module that like is not necessarily a core language feature, but is something that's written a whole bunch of different times, can be made against some sort of RFC, but that would have to live in some sort of namespace. And the ones that were tossed around were STD and JS. I think JS is what they're moving forward with. Then there's some kind of meta questions about whether or not there should be different namespaces for different kinds of modules that does not have consensus around it. So would there be like a web colon and a JS colon and a maybe sound colon? But it was just kind of like, if there's things that are DOM specific, does that belong in a JS namespace? Or alternatively, is the JS namespace something that any standards body can publish to, in which case we'd need some sort of joint governance process around that. So kind of that is one place where things are being explored. The WebAssembly working group is also working on WASI, the WebAssembly system interfaces. And
we're
they're
working with them, yeah.
all of those into like a WASI _ unstable namespace eventually. WASI colon namespace. Both of these different standards organizations are looking at using kind of like a URI scheme like setup for how we do the namespaces. We have a PR in Node for adding a Node.js namespace. So that would be Node.js colon, I think is what we're talking about moving forward with. And there was debate about whether or not we should do that or we should do at Node.js /. So there's kind of debate back and forth about whether or not it should be like a URI scheme type thing or whether or not it should be a scope. I have a bias towards the schemes and keeping things kind of consistent across all of the different runtimes as far as how a built-in is made. I guess one of the questions that it then comes to from GitHub's perspective would be, would a registry itself be a namespace. And I think that there's some conversation, and I think some concern that I've heard from the Node.js about making like the registry that something comes for part of the specifier text and something that exists within the source text versus it being something that exists within metadata such as a package JSON. So that's just something I want to throw out there as kind of like a concern that I've heard floated by the TSC. We've got some hands up, Jan and Michael, and then maybe after they chime in, Brian, you can come back and make sure that I haven't kind of squirreled too much from what you were trying to talk about.
Great.
Jan?
One thing that I wanted to throw in as like related to work that's currently going on is also Anthropic, who is very early stages, but they are also trying to figure out a way to distinguish between different origins for packages as an additional namespace. And in that case, a protocol definitely starts to become awkward, because if every single instance of Anthropic or any other distributed package registry would get its own protocol, we would be entering a very weird world. But yeah, I'm definitely intrigued in general by the idea of having some kind of protocol for third-party libraries, whether it is an npm colon for anything that is an npm registry. But yeah, no good answers yet.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking as you were talking that like the namespacing you were describing is quite different than the namespacing based on location, right? It's so, and they would almost be like you'd have to have potentially double namespacing, because like two of those styles could apply. So if there was some way, I mean, I guess the challenge is that it's hard, but it'd be better if you could just point at a particular registry endpoint and it would figure out where to try and get the packages from.
Yeah, I think for me there, a lot of it was about like, we could do like npm colon or GitHub colon or something like that inside of the specifiers, but that was kind of a solution that I was mentioning a couple TSC members were not very fond of, like having kind of leak into the specifier itself. Brad?
So I think you could take some experience if you look at what happened on mobile operating systems into account. The original way that you would do deep linking into apps was with protocols. That's now frowned upon for a variety of reasons. And so looking at historical reasons on why having tons of protocols would be enlightening here. We don't have to discuss that right now. But what they've moved on to is something that's generally called universal links, where an app can occupy essentially a scope within a existing protocol. For mobile operating systems, that's generally going to be HTTPS. So they have a similar problem where they have to delegate to the proper app within these scopes, essentially. And maybe we should be looking at something like that and their experience on why they now frown at using protocols for things that are kind of third party to the operating system itself.
Thank you, Brad. Jeremiah?
Hey, yeah, so this part of the conversation is kind of new to me. I guess it's not really something I considered before, maybe heard about in the conversations. I haven't followed as good as I maybe could. But I'm kind of, maybe it's out of the scope for this particular conversation, but I'm kind of interested to know where people think, if we have, say, multiple specifiers or whatever we want to call them, for different registries or essentially different installs, where those things will live on disk or network or wherever you're actually pulling the file from. because there's like enough, if we have multiple of those and they may be overlapping, then we have to essentially deconflictize node modules, which I hope someone's thought about.
Jan?
Yeah, I mean, just for prior work, there's also the Go and, well, originally, I guess, the Java ecosystem where you would just have a com.github. As a namespace, which gives you a URL DNS-based namespacing and ownership concept that has been scaling well in that ecosystem, as far as I know, at least.
Gordon?
Yeah, so sorry I missed the first chunk of the conversation. Are we talking about Node loading modules from anywhere other than on disk?
I think, and then maybe Brian can chime in, since, maybe you wanted to say something earlier. I think it was specifically about, like, let's say you have modules that you're getting from GitHub registry and other modules that you're getting from the NPM registry.
Sure.
Are we using the specifier text to explicitly differentiate between those sources of truth, or are we keeping everything in like a flat namespace and then relying on package managers to kind of smartly decouple that? The latter has obvious security concerns, but the former also has kind of like a leaky abstraction as far as like bifurcating the ecosystem. So,
Right.
Nothing's good.
Barring, let me assume for the rest of my comment that we're not going to make any major architectural changes to the way that modules work in Node. The only thing that, like, the specifier has rules that it already follows, and let's assume we stick to those, which means that the package manager is what installs it. NPM already has the capability per scope to install from different registries. It already has the capability in package.json to say that bare specifier foo actually installs this other NPM package, which might be from a scope that comes from a something other than the public registry. I feel like that it would be a really strange and turbulent decision to do anything different than trying to get NPM to support something in the right-hand side of a package.json field that can point to a different registry, or something in npm-rc or something, such that Node just doesn't care what registry it comes from. Because currently, like, nothing, you can have a bunch of packages that are just committed to your Git repo that don't come from any registry, or you can install them from the public npm registry, or you can install them from Verdaccio or Sinopia or Artifactory, and Node doesn't, and I think shouldn't care. And so the addition of GitHub to that, to me, is something that I think Node and the modules group should somewhat weigh in on, but but in terms of like usability and DX and stuff, but that it's pretty much exclusively an NPM decision. And Yarn and other clients, but like a package manager decision. I don't think it would be a easy, short-term, or really even a good idea for Node to become directly involved in where do packages come from.
Brian, you've got your hand up.
Cool. Yeah, I think there's a bunch of stuff I wanted to try to respond to. So, I think I generally agree with what Jordan was saying there. Essentially the problem we ran into, right, is that because NPM has been very nice and done really specific things about GitHub URLs over time, means that we are in this spot where it generally thinks to go to Git. Because we haven't had a package registry, so it's very hard to actually feed it a URL where you would say, I want you to talk NPM to this GitHub URL, and that's like one of the binding problems that we've kind of found here. And I don't know that actually you can tell it to talk to other registries in the same way, but it always assumes that a GitHub URL is doing certain things against Git. So that kind of comes to like why we liked the concept of the NPM : protocol, because to us it created a new space where we could say, okay, you want to talk the NPM API, which is going to be over HTTP or something like that, but then here's the domain and here's like a URI that describes exactly where that package is coming from. I understand the mobile app kind of like protocol problem. I don't know how to weigh in on that specifically, but yeah, I guess I've seen that. And as a web person who used to work for Mozilla for a long time, I totally fear extra protocols as well. And then, yeah, like I guess going back to the tying the location of the package, or tying the package back to a location every time. I think for us, we kind of look at this, hopefully in the long run, as kind of an IPFS style like system really helping out here, because I think there will be, there may be a lot more locations involved in packages, and that we can mitigate a lot of this by understanding what's actually within the package, by helping, like having metadata that more concretely describes what the package is. This matters a lot to us at GitHub. One of the reasons why we were doing this project is because when we hold the source, we think we can provide a lot more information about how the package was built, with like build receipts and things like that, and actually like being able to understand what's in the package itself, which means that then we could really help describe the data that you're getting, and anyone else could use that information as well to say they have the exact same package that GitHub has, but you're just getting it from a different source location. And so that kind of is how we hope in the future multiple registries having the same package might be mitigated.
We've hit time. Does anyone have a problem with extending by 5 more minutes?
I just want clarification. I don't really have a question.
Okay.
Do we know if those Git transactions on the current npm CLI affect all subdomains or just the main domain?
As far as I know, it's just the GitHub domains where it does special stuff, but we haven't tested it with other Git
like the
providers.
pkg.github.com is a subdomain. I was just curious. Anyway.
Okay, cool. So is there anything actionable for right now, or kind of next steps for the moment? Or is this maybe something, Brian, that someone from your team could maybe join the modules team and just kind of participate in our meetings and work towards kind of like where we go moving forward?
Yeah, I think that sounds great from our end. I think for us, we're going to try to attempt like a prototype of one of these versions to see what we can do. It's going to be, these might be breaking changes for what the GitHub package registry is doing right now. So we're trying to work around that. And we also have kind of customer concerns, right? Where I think, like you mentioned, if whatever we're doing requires client-side changes, especially through NPM, then that's going to be really difficult for a lot of our customers to accept, that they have to then like update to the latest version of NPM if the NPM client does make these changes. So that's kind of like, we might effectively, yeah, I'll participate, and I think we'll probably bring 2 solutions to this, where we're saying, here's our long-term like URI like thing that we figured out that like you all agree and we agree is like a good path going forward for the long term. And then probably here's like also our short-term hack that makes the NPM client work for existing services. And
yeah.
Brian, how is updating NPM more burdensome than updating Node?
Well, I'm saying like getting enterprises to update to like the latest version of NPM in whatever their like install-based system is. It's I don't know that it's worse, but I know it's difficult to get them.
Airbnb's updating NPM was way easier than updating Node.
Yeah,
by a large.
Another thing that I think is worth putting out there, like at least from the TSC, there didn't seem to be any concerns about the path that involved like NPM or a package manager needing to know something about metadata. The concern was far more about like this leaking into specifier text and being inside of the source tree itself. So like it was more about like not wanting to see like NPM : lodash GitHub : thing, so that you would actually be like, the problem would be more about like explicitly having that in source text. There wasn't actually really any concern about it being something that would be handled by NPM.
Okay. And just to clarify, you're saying that that concern isn't about like the package JSON where we're referring to where it's coming from. It's more about the source text, or is it
Exactly. Yeah, the concern was not about the package JSON at all.
both? Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly how we want it to work. It's just that, yeah, like right now, NPM assumes a lot of things about GitHub URLs, so we can't offer. It's found to be very difficult to offer a thing where we point to GitHub as a registry.
Mm-hmm. Just a small idea, you could do GPR :
Yeah.
Just other ideas of schemes you could look at. And one thing we're looking into, if you want to follow up separately about this, would be registering the schemes with IANA.
Yep.
So, because we're looking into trying to see like, hey, can we have this, be standardized and go through the official venue to do that. Cool. So I think that is that on this topic, although the next topic that we have lined up intersects with this a bit because it's something that could be used in userland to implement. Who wants to take on and start the discussion about loaders? Brad? Jan? Jan has their hand up, so Jan, take it away.
One thing that I would maybe do is maybe introduce kind of the use case that Alex is currently running into, because I think it demonstrates quite nicely some of the restrictions, problems with what the current loader API looks like. It might help motivate some of the ideas that we have been throwing around in the past.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Alex Babashan. I've been at Google for a bit working on experiments into transparently loading dependencies from a bundle, trying to get something that works that doesn't require buying into a particular dependency loading system like Webpack, and it can be applied to projects more generally. And up to this point, that's required a lot of, I've been mostly working on the CommonJS side, a lot of knowledge about how CommonJS works and a decent amount of re-implementation of just CommonJS internals. And it's kind of like demonstrated like it would be nice to have a way of more generally providing hooks into dependency loading at like kind of a lower level than either of the CommonJS or ESM module loading systems, more at like the resource or the resolution level, and then kind of things like that. I opened an issue on GitHub or on the modules working group about this, and there's been a lot of prior thought, mostly last year, I think, into loader hooks. Things like the -- loader flag, per dependency loaders, multiple hook, are composing multiple loaders into one, and how to manage that, as well as a lot of other things. And I kind of am hoping to kick off discussion again on that front and hopefully get things in a place where it's actionable in terms of creating prototypes and making progress on that front. Because I'm really interested in the topic and I hope to like work on it.
Very cool. Thank you, Alex. Does anyone have anything to add here? Guy or oh, Brad, you've got your hand up. Brad?
So I do think if you're mostly interested in CommonJS, that hasn't been discussed at great length in this group. There were proof of concepts made last year about how to use atomics to properly call back into the main thread. We could discuss that at large. I'd be curious as to what you're wanting to do. A lot of the latest loader designs and stuff we've talked about this year have been kind of based upon old designs from, like you said, last year. And I was wondering if you've looked at those designs from middle of last year, or if you think you need more APIs than just the loader hooks themselves. I did see you also linked to a generalized resource API. So just general thoughts on that, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Sure. So, I mean, right now I've been working with CommonJS just because that's where a lot of the ecosystem is, though I'm interested in looking at ESM as well. I'm definitely playing catch up with a lot of things, but from what I've seen of the current -- loader API, it doesn't seem like there's one thing that seems to be missing to me is the ability to basically compose loaders. Like if I create a loader and have it as the last loader on a project, how do I know that I'm not overwriting the functionality of previous loaders in some kind of stack? That's what was most notable to me. And on the CommonJS side, I figure that if we were to work on an API that's general enough, something like the resource API, then hopefully we'd be able to use that from within CommonJS on the Node side to extend the loader hooks API to both module systems, where I think it could be useful. I don't know if there's, let's see.
Yeah, and just to amend some observations on that from my front, I think in the past year or so, the conversation, like for example, when Entropic came out, the first thing they said was, oh yeah, and of course we will not be just loading the module contents from Node modules because a new system shouldn't be doing that. And now Entropic obviously is not actually here, but Tink is not too far away. Plug and Play is at least somewhat out there and is in use by people. And to Jordan's repeated point of CommonJS isn't going away, if we provide loader hooks that can do transforms and that can do loading from archives and all that kind of stuff, if we do not support CommonJS, we get to the weird place where, for example, if you want to write your code in CoffeeScript or TypeScript and have a transform that code on the fly, as people will do once we have loader hooks, now you suddenly need to make sure that if you have some stuff that is in CommonJS, you now have to still use required extensions for that piece because you can never stop using it as long as there is some CommonJS involved. Whereas if CommonJS would also use the same loader infrastructure, we could actually phase out some uses of require extensions, and people could just use one loader hook to solve it in both systems, which I think has value because the current loader system definitely goes from the assumption that CommonJS can be ignored, which from all we've seen from Ting and Plug and Play, and now also from these kinds of projects, like loading from an archive, CommonJS cannot be ignored, at least not in the near-term future.
Jeffrey has their hand up.
Hey, hopefully this isn't off topic, but something when you said something that made me think about something I've been talking about privately with somebody, which was like not knowing how loaders work under the hood or too much about them. My naive, like as a developer, what I wish they could do would be like, let me give a function that Node would call either before or after it resolves a specifier, in case I want to say like, oh, resolve to this path instead. And then ditto before and after it actually like loads a source code or content from disk. Like it loads a CoffeeScript file, I transpile it and send and return the JavaScript instead. Both of those things could easily be agnostic as to the module system. Like they could be, I guess, like along with what what is to be loaded, I would assume that like my function would be passed whether it's ESM or CommonJS, so that I know like whether to generate CommonJS or ESM output, for example. But yeah, these could absolutely be lower level things that could apply to both systems as we like work to merge the systems. So yeah, all in favor of what you're talking about, assuming it's something along the lines of what I just described, or enables what I just described.
Guy, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the fact that the CommonJS hooks that we have today through require.extensions and I forget what the other one is for hooking, the resolver find module or something like that. That hasn't inhibited the growth of ecosystems around these kind of loader workflows in CommonJS. TS Node does TypeScript compilation. We have CopyScript transpilers doing similar things. Jay Dalton's ESM project. That this work still exists, and that, for example, the work that you're exploring there, Alex, I guess it's not hindered at the moment in terms of it is possible. So maybe it almost becomes more of a usability discussion or a sort of having nicer code. And then the other thing I think it's worth balancing that against is the design of the hooks for ES modules. We're hitting a number of constraints on that design, including things like security. We're considering whether we should have the loaders running on separate threads and things like that. And I guess we could tie it all together and have one nice system. I just personally see there being a lot of the higher priorities first to tie together a nice ES module loading interface. But I certainly agree with the sentiments here.
Salah?
Yeah, I think there's an additional concern with, like in today's, using special loaders with Node today, like TS Node and other kind of loaders. You're really applying this to packages within your immediate control. But if we're going to try to break that barrier and say this is a more universal thing, then you will likely have a package author of some abstract nature we don't know today say that my content needs to be loaded this way. They know how their particular modules should be loaded. And I believe this is, at least unexplored, if not, leading to a lot of discomfort. People thinking that, okay, no, like this is too unpredictable to let every package decide how it should be loaded. But it's not necessarily one or the other, right? But it's just an area of complexity.
Sure. Gus, you have your hand up, and then Jan, you'd like to respond afterwards?
Hello. So one of the things that is somewhat taken for granted in ESM is the ability to have module resources that are not necessarily local disk resources. Like you mentioned, like loading things out of an archive that you might not necessarily even need to extract the archive to disk to do that. You can load parts of it into memory. And these things really do not play well with CommonJS. Not that I'm saying we shouldn't like try to pursue these goals, but certain things like even the keys in the require cache, if they're like there was a PR a while ago to Node. I don't remember if it was for the REPL or the -E, which changed the specifier that code runs under in an attempt to improve the stack trace, and it broke packages in the ecosystem that assumed that would always be under the specifier would always either be a file name to a place on disk or like REPL or eval. And so like these constraints really, like I'm just concerned that trying to move forward with this, we will hit these kind of things that can't really be fixed in CommonJS. Like if we try to make a common API between these, if a call comes from ESM, you know, it makes perfect sense to give it some random RAM location as a resource. But if the request comes from CommonJS, it would completely break everything. That's just my concern.
Thank you. Jan?
So that's a pretty good segue into like the context of this project we've had over here for a while. We needed a way to load resources not from disk that was that didn't need that could be done at a platform level that wasn't like developer aware, right? So and to do that, we had to know so much about CommonJS. We had to re-implement CommonJS so that it could work in memory. We optimized, we created this bundle format with all of the source text and set it up so that, wow, I'm reasonably nervous for no reason. I don't know what's going on. Sorry, everybody. we made a bundle format so that okay, we had to package all the source text so that Cloud Functions would start up faster. A similar use case to NCC, and we have all of the files on disk. We're building the IDs and specifiers and everything so that they match the files on disk, but none of the source text actually comes from disk. We just absolutely do not want to read from disk because hitting the cold file system cache in a container just takes too long, right?
Yeah, just to clarify on what Gus just said is this is not solved, but also not theoretical. Like there is a set of programs written in CommonJS that this can run. There's definitely unsolved problems. Like for example, I think like .node binary files, we kind of know that's a no-go because not on all operating systems, on all contexts, it's easy to make them load from memory. But if you don't go for, so basically this would always be an opt-in feature. It would not be the Node default behavior to load from those archives. You would not just by installing Node get this behavior. So the 100% coverage of CommonJS definitely is not possible. Having it as a feature that people can opt into and platform support for APIs so that those tools are easy to write and maintain without requiring certain monkey patch magic function pieces.
Yeah, so it's like
possible.
What it highlighted was that it's the API that I actually wanted was the ability to just provide source text without having to know anything about how modules are loaded, right? Like I need CommonJS needs to know like whether certain things are supposed to exist and then how to proceed from there. And it needs to know where the source text is. So like I'm much more interested in a lower level API that I can provide source text and have that completely decoupled from how modules are resolved. And that's the way I think, that's the API that I see that CommonJS and ESM can share. Now, I can't promise a user that their program will work if they don't put all of the files on disk. If the loader needs to also make sure that the environment has all the files in order to work with CommonJS, that's up to that environment and that loader. Yeah.
So Brad, you have your hand up?
Sure. So I think the most telling thing here is we have multiple different high-level runtimes. They generally call themselves, what is it, like new package managers or install list package managers these days. We even see presentations about them at NodeConf.eu where people are monkey patching the file system API to do stuff like this and relying on CommonJS internals. They're not going to stop doing that unless we provide a alternative. So if we want to actually lock down and kind of provide better guarantees about module loading, we have to provide them an API. It's not really an option. If you all think it's fine just with resource loading API, I would try to pass that. I don't even know if you need to go through the modules working group for the most part, except for the changes that would be done to get CommonJS to use it internally. And this group is largely focused on ESM, so we would just kind of look at it when we do our ESM implementation. At least that's what I'm hearing now. So that's a personal thing. I don't know how the rest of the group feels. That's it.
Okay. Guy has their hand up, and then just a small thing to the group. We are almost at time, and we have not talked about exports at all. Is there much to talk about regarding exports right now, Jan, or should we just stick to this topic for right now?
I think the quick update on exports is there is a level 1 base pull request that is currently, I think, in a landable state if we decide to say, yes, we want to land it and build on top of it.
Okay, so let's do 3 more minutes on this and leave the last 2 minutes to just check on exports. So Guy, you wanted to say something?
Sure, let me just try a context swap as well from writing all these notes. It's actually a surprising amount of effort trying to write notes. Yeah, I just wanted to mention on this point of a resource or kind of a file loading API. And that's that I think that's, it seems like a really simple concept to just have a fetch hook, or sorry, a load or a read file hook. But that can't be separated from the statting that happens in the resolver as well. And so then you need a stat hook, but then we have resolvers all over the place. And now you're back on pathing, and now you're back into URLs. And then again, the problem Gus mentioned of having both URLs and paths in these 2 different module systems. So I'm just worried of us oversimplifying that hook, and that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, great. So does anyone else have anything to add to hooks for right now, or should we move on to the exports discussion? Okay, we'll move forward to exports. So Jan, can you tell us a little bit more about the PR?
Right. So the PR was mostly written by Guy originally, which is just a very basic. There are exports that are now recognized by the ESM loader. So if you have a package that has an exports field and you try to import a path relative to the specifier, exports will be used and other access to the internals of the package will be blocked. Otherwise, it will just fall through to the old behavior of, by default, // is mapped to / and all files are accessible. There is currently only, so there are multiple items outlined in the PR description of things that we explicitly punted on and said, these are things that we want to address before we unflag it. But right now it's a flagged implementation of just the ESM bits, with the idea that under the same flag, we would also add the CommonJS bits and kind of iron out the exact semantics of some of the specifier edge cases and breaking out of the package boundaries with the mappings, like all the kind of stuff we kind of want to do in follow-up steps. So right now it's just, this is the base implementation that we can send pull requests against for ironing out the rest.
Great. Jordan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly clarify. I think we're on the same page about the semantic of what happens when you omit exports, but you described it as the default being an object of // maps to //. Wouldn't it have to be like effectively every file that exists in the package mapping to itself or something like I'm not clear on because // a wild card, does it?
Right. So the trailing / means directory mapping, which means everything following it maps as a directory to the another directory. So // map to / is basically you expose everything.
Got it. Okay. So similarly, I'm just clarifying, I could do something like / mapped to build / and then I've removed the build from everyone's report. Cool. Thank you. That's clear.
Okay, I think that's about it. We have 2 minutes left on the meeting, so I'm going to wrap it up. Just as a heads up to everyone, I'm about to head out of office for 2 weeks, so I'm not going to be around to run the next meeting. So you're going to have to find someone to chair and someone to help with the stream. So you may want to kick off in the issue, just finding people to make sure you have all the things, specifically someone who has access to the Zoom account. Other than that, I think that's it. So I'm going to shut down the stream.